To unpack the real issues affecting the Tasman nations, this is Trans Tasman Talk. Jointly produced by the Unshackled.net and rightminds.nz. Now here's Tim Willems in Australia and Dieuwe in New Zealand.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Trans Tasman Talk. I'm over here in Melbourne. It is Tuesday the 24th of September and I've got Dieuwe over in Auckland. How are you?
Hey, hello Tim, I'm doing well.
Now, as the title of the third episode says tonight, both of our leaders, Jacinda Ardern and Scott Morrison, were over in New York, over where the Atlantic Ocean is, because that's where the UN Climate Change Summit was just held yesterday, United States time. And obviously Jacinda Ardern went. Our Prime Minister Scott Morrison didn't, but he got a state dinner at the White House, which was seen as such a big deal and an honour over here in Australia. But Jacinda Ardern, she was just there to go and talk about climate change. And Donald Trump, he sort of went in between. He rocked up, made about a 15-minute cameo, and that was it.
That's right. Jacinda got the very short end of the stick over in New York, and we're a little bit envious there of Scott Morrison, who got Trump's second ever state dinner, and a lot of other nations got bilateral meetings with President Trump, and Jacinda was the only one who got a simple I forget the exact name of it. It's the lowest level of diplomatic meeting you can possibly get. Like a stand, basically a sit down, a 5-minute meeting with Trump, and no press was allowed, no trade deals, no steel, tariff exemptions, no nothing.
I read that it was a 25-minute meeting that it ended up as.
In the end, it was. I believe they had a total of 40 minutes scheduled, and the meeting did go longer than a usual short meeting would go, so they clearly did have a bit of a chat, but we can't really know what went on there, other than that Jacinda said they talked about confiscating guns and the Christchurch call that apparently Trump really likes, but he won't sign up to it.
Well, it's always been suspected that Trump is a closet gun control advocate, and he sort of lets it slip every now and then. But of course, the Republicans and the NRA in his base are like, what the hell? There's no way we're going to cop that. Now, we are live on both the Unshackled and the Right Minds New Zealand YouTube channels. On the Unshackled channel, if you're watching there, you can send us through a super chat, which means that we read it out, and if it's a question, you get your question answered, though the Right Minds channel can't receive super chats yet.
That's right. So if you do have a question and I recognize your name, I'll answer it. And I see a couple of guys in the chat already, so good to see you, and I will be I'll be following that closely. And someone has just said the correct name of the meeting that Jacinda and Trump had was called a pull aside, and a pull aside is the lowest level of diplomatic meeting you can have. Everyone else got a bilateral meeting, and the Australians got a full state dinner.
Jacinda just got the scraps.
Basically, that's what happened. So we're basically a joke on the world stage right now.
But the first world leader to receive a state dinner from Donald Trump was actually Emmanuel Macron, who, well, is not a natural ally of Trump. So if Macron can get a state dinner, then maybe Jacinda can.
Well, Macron, as much as he may be unpopular, is at least a statesman, and he knows how Trump thinks, and he knows how to get along with Trump. And Jacinda, on the other hand, went to the Women's March against Trump the day after his inauguration.
Did she?
That's not yes, she did. She was there. I should have sent you a photo.
Yeah, she wasn't Prime Minister at the time, though.
That's right, she wasn't. So this was during or just before our election, and she went along and she was holding these placards to dump Trump, and stand up for women's rights and so on. She says it wasn't to get rid of Trump now, because that would look kind of bad, seeing that she's prime minister. But yes, she's definitely, that's not something that I really suspect it's why we got the short end of the stick at the UN.
Well, you probably need a women's march against the New Zealand Labour Party now.
Yes, we
after
do.
what we talked about last week.
That's right. So this is going to be another Labour sex scandal episode, because I don't know if it's just a coincidence, but since we've started the show, every single week we've had a fresh Labour sex scandal. And the latest one is a Christchurch councillor. He is actually Christchurch's first gay councillor. And he was grooming and sending inappropriate photos to young men or young boys aged 13 and up. And the exact nature of the group that he was involved in has not been revealed. The media said that to protect the identities of these young people, they won't be revealing that. But it appears to likely have been some kind of Labour-affiliated pride organisation.
Yeah, I noticed that the Fake News Hub article, when I first heard of this, it referred to sending inappropriate messages and comments to young people, and it was a youth group, which is basically they're trying to undercut that, like, he's a gay creep, allegedly. And so they use the general term use, and of course when they're trying to sort of cover up the true identity of like victims or perpetrators, they use those vague terms.
Yeah, and they were as vague as can be, and it was an exact repeat of the staffer scandal that Jacinda has in her office, where basically the chair of the council knew about this scandal months ago and did absolutely nothing, and only when it came out did they start an investigation. But unlike the other creeps, this one has actually fronted up as soon as it was public, of course, not before then. But while the rest have, the other two are still currently unknown and they're trying to keep it buried, this one has come out and said it was him, and they're doing the same investigation that they're doing into the other ones. Internal party investigation, run by a Labour Party insider to figure out what the Labour Party was doing.
In Stuff today, which is one of your main news websites, it's actually owned by Fairfax, which in Australia is known as quite left-wing, but they seem to be a bit better in New Zealand Stuff, because they've actually gone into a bit more detail about the allegations, and it speaks to one of the boys who said he was given the alias Josh told Radio New Zealand, I think that's what RNZ stands for, he met Swigs at an event where he was bear-hugged after going in for a handshake, made him feel unsafe, he said. Josh also alleges that Swigs messaged him on Facebook out of the blue and late at night asking why he did not have a profile picture and calling him a very attractive lad. He told Radio New Zealand further messages in May that made him feel uncomfortable and prompted him to come forward. Now, obviously, like a gay counsellor sort of saying to like 13-year-old boy, that sort of comment, it can be sort of taken the wrong way.
Well, that should be taken the wrong way, I think, regardless to who it's in. I don't know why. Well, I suppose I do know why the Labour Party attracts lots of different creeps, and it seems that whether you are gay or straight or anything in between, if you're a young person, you should stay very, very far away from the New Zealand Labour Party at the moment.
Sort of the more, I would say, less creepy term is maybe handsome or pretty. Like, because obviously attractive, that's obviously has a, creepy sexual connotation.
Definitely.
Because say like 50, 60 years ago, you could say words like handsome, pretty, beautiful, and there was no sexual thing, but basically because everything's sexual these days, everyone's much more sort of sexually open and active, things are taken like that. And so if he's an elected politician, he should have known better, even if he meant it hypothetically in a non-sexual way, that's pretty creepy.
And the other reports are not mentioned in that article that you read out, but he included sending like nude photos of himself to several others. So he was definitely
Okay,
Right.
okay,
So
yeah, yeah.
that's
Oh,
the level
yeah.
it went to with several of the other complainants. Well, I say they complain. They're not necessarily accusers, but it's been admitted, right? So it's not like we're talking with.
That wasn't in the article that I said.
I did. Oh, and I've got it open here. If I can bring that up, and what have we got at the moment?
Yeah, because if it's nude photos, that's completely different.
Okay,
And
so sorry, I should get sorry. So it apparently sent a sexually explicit meme, so not necessarily nude photos of
yes,
himself.
yes,
So
yes.
yeah, I got that one.
That's a bit different.
So, yeah, okay, I'm just checking that. Sorry, that was my fault there. I did remember that one. I did remember that one wrong. I'm getting my labor sex scandals mixed up now.
And these are all underage boys.
Yeah, they said it was up to age 21. So
Oh, okay,
not
21.
not all underage boys, but most
Yeah,
of
what's
them.
the age of consent in New Zealand?
16, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so, and obviously to like send like sexually explicit images, you need to be 18. So there's sort of those two different ones. So, at the very least, he's a creep, alleged creep.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, he admitted to being a creep. He did straight up admit that this was him and that he was being creepy and so on. So, and I think the reason he fronted up and the others haven't is because his issues were a far less serious nature than the rest, and that's probably why he's decided to own up to it. But yeah, that's basically the Labour Party in New Zealand. And in case any Australian listeners think that basically New Zealand is just filled with creepy people, we're just a little bit unlucky with the news at the moment, I think.
Oh, well, given what's happened with Justin Trudeau over in Canada at the moment, they're in the middle of the election campaign, and 3 blackface photos, well, one's a video, have come out in a space of, I think it was 12 hours, and I wonder if people have been looking to see if Jacinda Ardern is in blackface this week. But apparently all they could come up with in the end was that one of your media bosses, he had blackface, from the publisher of the New Zealand Herald, which is called New Zealand Media and Entertainment.
Yeah,
And there it is there.
Yeah. And so he's had to apologise for his blackface indiscretions, which were as late as 2015, I believe. I forgot that. I'm pretty sure I've got that date right. 2015, and Trudeau was actually a little bit early.
Yes, his was, and
so it's a little bit weird. For some reason, it seems to be very common in America and Canada and even New Zealand for the people of a liberal left-wing persuasion they feel they have the need to rub some shoe polish on their face. It seems to be a quite bizarre behavior, and I'm not really sure why they're the ones who always end up doing this. And not that actually most right-wing people would say that it should be banned, but for some reasons the left-wing ones who complain about it are always the ones who are caught out doing this stuff. Right? They say you shouldn't do it, and they're the only ones that are really doing it.
Can you recall any conservative politicians, personalities who have ever worn blackface? I haven't been able to think of one.
Neither. That's and I believe I saw a show a couple of months ago where this was discussed in America on Fox, and same thing. The commenters there who were American, they couldn't think of the last time a conservative had been caught wearing blackface. It was all the Democrat Klansmen from the 70s, but for some reason they were still doing it in the 90s and the 2000s and even the 2010s now.
We were talking about last week, because given the sex scandals that are unfolding, off air you told me that it's blown over now, and Jacinda, she's definitely there until MAGA 2020, the New Zealand general election, make Ardern go away. And I sort of said to you, have people like us got Ardern derangement syndrome in the same way that there's Trump derangement syndrome?
Yeah, there are a few people, and because there's not very much in the way of right-wing media, and so in case of Trump derangement syndrome, that gets amplified because the media is constantly saying, we've got Trump this time, we've got him, he's going away. And with Ardern, there's a whole lot less of that. I have seen some people say, oh, she's, this is it, she could be gone. That does not appear to be the case. And my prediction would be that she's perfectly safe until the next election, and possibly if she wins re-election, she's good to go. If there is some Ardern derangement syndrome, it most certainly isn't that people think she's going to get brought down by these scandals, any minute.
But she can't do anything right. Is that still Ardern derangement syndrome, or just stating fact?
Well, there could be an argument to be made there, but it's like that with all political leaders, and I do think she tends to be rather. At the very least, she tends to be unfortunate, and even the people on her side have to admit that. They have to say, well, they have to make up excuses for why, other people are failing her, basically. So I definitely do think that you've got that. The Jacinda can't do anything right is more of a reality rather than derangement.
She made a oopsie because before she was in the United States, she stopped off at Japan, and she forgot which Asian country she was in, and she thought she was in China.
Yes, my explanation there was it was simply a Freudian slip where she really wished that she were back visiting her comrades in China rather than the more nationalist Japan. And it's a bit weird that she could get that wrong because she wasn't actually visiting China on that trip, and so either a staffer gave her the wrong info. In fact, I saw some satire on the BFD where somebody basically said, it was the fault of a staffer who told her she was in Japan, which was more of a joke, but that almost sounded like it could be a legitimate excuse.
Oh, it actually could be progressive racism, because she and her staffers might think that all Asians look the same, and they just looked around the room and forgot that they were actually in Japan and not China.
They would never admit to being that racist.
But do you think it's plausible?
I think it might be plausible. It is an incredibly weird mistake to make. I don't believe she wasn't talking about the China in the context either. So it's sometimes people get countries mixed up, like they're talking about North Korea and South Korea, and they get the wrong country in there. It was quite a bizarre mistake.
What happens when foreign leaders visit Australia? The worst thing they say is, instead of saying Australia, they say Austria. That's just a pronunciation error. We definitely don't speak German.
No, not in this timeline anyway. So you guys, and the same thing with New Zealand is, people tend to confuse New Zealand with Australia, which is a common one. It's like, New Zealand, that's, like Australia or part of Australia and so on. But yeah, like you say, confusing China and Japan is quite a weird one unless you think they all look the same.
Now, one of your media organisations put in a Freedom of Information request to get the letter that Australian radio broadcaster Alan Jones sent to Jacinda Ardern to apologise for the sock down the throat, backhander puke comments, which everyone, the loud people in Australia were outraged against, but nobody in New Zealand seemed to care too much.
No, there were a few media organisations who ran like one story or two stories, and it was never really a big outrage in New Zealand. No. But I did hear of the letter. I actually haven't looked at it. I'm assuming it's a corporate, some kind of like the standard corporate apology. So I'd be keen to see the contents of it.
Yeah, let's have a look. So, my dear Prime Minister. You may be aware of media coverage of comments that I made on my Australian radio program yesterday morning. I was speaking about Australia's contribution to climate change. On this issue, my views differ significantly from yours. One of my comments, which has been broadly reported and doesn't need to be repeated here, didn't quite come out as intended. I had meant to say, put a sock in it, and my actual words were taken literally by some who took offence on your behalf. Well, yes, he's right there that a lot of people like to take offence on other people's behalf. Prime Minister, I would like to assure you that I did not intend to suggest any violence towards you. I clarified this online yesterday and again on my morning radio program, stating that while I may disagree with your stance on climate change, I would never wish any harm to you. Please accept my sincere apology for the words spoken, and I hope that my intentions are at least clear. Should you consider it beneficial to discuss this matter with me, I'd be pleased to call you at a convenient time. I would also like to extend an invitation to participate in an interview on my program, which would be constructive debate on the issue of climate change. Again, my sincerest apologies, and please know I wish you and your family the best. And Jacinda Ardern, she never really said that she accepted the apology, but it wasn't a big deal to her, so she behaved a whole lot better than our Prime Minister at the time, Julia Gillard, when Alan Jones, he didn't say this on air, but he was caught in a secret recording saying her recently deceased father died of shame because of her lies.
Yeah, ouch. I can imagine that causing a bit of a stir. The apology was actually more kind of a clarification, really. I thought, and the thing is, I think everyone got that he meant to say, put a sock in it, rather than suggesting that something actually be shoved down her throat. That was not. So I think the sort of the left-wing activists in Australia took that, they intentionally misrepresented it because they could get a story out of it, and clearly they did get some of his advertisers, and they did enough damage to get him to issue an apology. So they definitely a win for them.
Well, his employer, which used to be Macquarie Media, but now it's been taken over by Nine Entertainment Co., which also owns Fairfax, which owns stuff in New Zealand. They've now got a dump button operator now. So if Alan Jones says anything which could be controversial, they've got basically they've employed a new person to listen to his show and press the dump button if he says anything that could get them into trouble. But he has been more careful recently, like with the climate strikes that happened on Friday. He basically said that these children are being brainwashed. It's basically what Hitler and Goebbels did with the youth of Germany, and not Sleeping Giants Oz, but their partner in crime, the Twitter account Mad Fucking Witches. They digged up some old audio from a few months back. You can tell it's old. It's an old clip, actually, from his Sky News show, and you can tell it's an old clip because it's when the Darwin mass shooting happened. And like he's having a go at the kids for using like electricity and iPhones and that, and he calls them all little turds. But it was very deceptive, the tweet, because they posted it without comment, and everyone just gets sucked in by it, and they put in the when there's the Twitter thread, they just put in the second one that, this was from a few months ago. But of course, everyone retweeted it saying, gee, look how, Alan Jones is back at it again, even though it was an old thing. And he used more measured language this time with the current climate strike.
Yes, and the climate strikes, I haven't been paying particular attention to how it's going in New Zealand, but I understand it's they've sort of grown in size and severity in Australia. Yes,
we had in our major cities, Melbourne and Sydney, there were huge climate strikes, and there was a lot of commentary that the kids just wanted to take the day off school. It was the last day of term, which everyone sort of slacks off anyway. But the issue here is because it's been reported now that child psychologists, they're actually treating young children for eco-anxiety. They really think that the world's going to end in a climate apocalypse. And of course, at the Climate Change Summit in New York, Greta Thunberg, she made her speech saying, how dare you, you've stolen my future, you're destroying the planet. And there's even now some climate change advocates, like for Action on Climate Change, are saying we do need to mitigate the the effects of climate change, but it's not going to be an apocalypse in the next 10 years. And it's just been an escalation, and like obviously Greta is basically she's a figurehead of how these children have been, well, not just brainwashed but frightened. I mean, they shouldn't be traumatized children like that. It's horrible. They don't need to they don't need to panic and like have that sort of anxiety in their youth.
Yeah, and I watched that clip of Greta at the UN, her speech, and she was genuinely, angry and frustrated, and you can see the amount of trauma that they're inflicting on these young people by saying, the world is being destroyed and everything is getting ruined. And in reality, they're living in the most prosperous time. They're the freest, safest, wealthiest people who have ever lived, right? Essentially the luckiest 0.001% of people who have ever lived on this planet. And instead, they're spending their years being, stressed and worried about how the world's going to end, and about how, there's going to be, catastrophic climate change and everything's going to heat up, and they're all going to, basically have it, was it the mass extinction? That's what she writes. So she says they're all going to die, right? That's how it works. Sorry for the rain, if you can hear that. There's not much I can do about the rain.
Whoa. Interrupted by the rain. Just mute your microphone while I speak.
I'll try. My mute button hasn't been working, which is unfortunate.
Oh, it's alright now.
Okay?
Yeah, that's better now.
You can hear me?
Yeah. Oh, wait.
Yeah, it's just getting worse.
It was actually when you turned it down there for a moment, that was actually better. I could still hear you. Yeah, that's better now.
Yeah, the rain, so the rain is off and on, so now it's okay, and it'll cycle back. So I'm going to see if I can bring up my mute button and let you talk for a little bit.
It's not your wife doing the dishes.
No, that's definitely not what's happening right now. We had that problem at a different time.
Worst case scenario, what's going to happen through man-made climate change, if it does exist, is the planet's going to warm 2 degrees by the end of the century, which there's obviously going to be consequences to that, but not all of it is going to be bad. And obviously we can manage a 2-degree global warming with over a 100-year period.
Yes, exactly. So even if the warnings are, as if you take the amount of climate change that's supposedly going to happen into account, and then you calculate the cost of mitigation and so on, rather than calculating the massive economic damage that you will do if you prevent entire nations from developing and advancing, and the amount of economic damage that you would do by just basically cancelling out everybody's economic growth, that is an order of magnitude higher than the amount of money you're going to be paying to build a few extra dams and relocate a few people from deserts and so on. That's the worst case scenario, and not everybody's going to die.
Did you have climate strikes in New Zealand cities?
None that I saw, and I'm just going to, some people in the comments are going to tell me if they were aware of any climate strikes. I do believe they have been planned. They did plan something. But I'm not.
Do you think it could be?
I think they may have. Yeah.
The reason that they've been big in Australia is because we have a Conservative government with Scott Morrison as Prime Minister, and in New Zealand you have the climate warrior Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister, and you don't really want to go out in public and punch left in New Zealand.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird like that, and. So I have been told, this is what I thought, somebody in the comments says, there's one in Auckland this week. So it's actually not synchronized with the rest of the world, which did it last Friday, or was it just Australia that did it last Friday?
No, it was all around the world.
Yeah, so I don't know why the New Zealand one is somehow this week, and it is just in Auckland as well, unless somebody is going to tell me most recent. So yeah, September 27th, I've got a couple of messages coming in now, yes, that's right. So it's just Auckland, like you said, and it's probably due to the fact that we do have the Greens are basically in government in New Zealand. The Greens are part of the coalition support, But they still act like they're in the opposition, especially when they talk about climate change. We've got this zero carbon bill in front of Parliament that probably will pass. But the problem with something like a zero carbon bill is that it will destroy the economy. And so they're having to change the zero carbon bill to exempt farmers from, having to meet the standards, which is about 70 or 80% of New Zealand's, CO2 emissions. So it's all, basically they've realized they can't actually, do this drastic climate change action that they've been promoting, because everybody would start, well, I wouldn't say everybody would starve to death, but you would completely destroy New Zealand's economy, and you'd, within 2 years, you'd have another government that would completely reverse what you've just done. So yeah, it's a little bit stuck, because New Zealand is one of the few countries who would be in a position to meet with the demands of the protesters, and the government knows that they're not able to do it. And so there's a little bit of that balancing act going on between the activists, the climate change activists, and the actual government, knowing that the demands are unreasonable, and other than ushering in full communism, they're not going to get anywhere.
Did Jacinda get to meet Greta? Has that?
No, I have not. I have not seen that. I'm trying to think. Photos with Jacinda. She had one photo with Trump that I saw. She was wearing all red, by the way, just to make sure that we know that she's the leader of the Labour Party. And that was the only photo that I've seen from Jacinda at the UN.
I'm not sure if you saw Trump. You can see Greta in the background, and she notices Trump, and she looks like she's going to approach, and then Trump just walks right past, basically photo bombing.
Yeah, basically. And she gets quite angry. Obviously, she's been told that Trump is the climate change devil who's destroying the world. So it's basically like her arch nemesis walked into the room, and you can see that she does she gets very angry and so on. But I do think the whole situation with Greta is actually quite sad, in that she's everything she does is run by a PR team, basically, and she's just being manipulated for the gain of her parents and these organizations that control her.
Yeah, she and her parents wore Antifa shirts.
Yes, I remember seeing that, and she tweeted defending that, saying, "Oh, I didn't know what this meant." Well, you know what? You can ask your parents, right? I mean, everything that you know about climate change is coming from your parents.
Yeah, like you're supposed to be the all-knowing 16-year-old of the world, and like you're supposed to know everything about what's going to happen with climate change, but all of a sudden, oh, I'm not that smart. I don't know who Antifa is.
So yeah, and so the strike that we have in New Zealand is specifically a school one, and so probably mostly some high schools, universities, students, and so on who are doing this strike in New Zealand. But yeah, like I've already said, is there's very little that they can achieve, because the people who are supposed to be achieving their demands are already in government.
Now, you've got an election over in New Zealand at the moment in Auckland, the mayoral race there. Now, New Zealand, it's a unitary system of government, which means it only has a national government. So basically, the city mayoral races are the closest things to state elections. Are the mayors of the various cities, are they full-time? Because most of the ones we have in Australia, apart from the Lord Mayors, are part-time.
So that's so for the Australian audience especially, yeah, so our government is incredibly simple. We have a single chamber national government, so a unicameral legislature, and then we have councils at the local level, which are all just run by councillors with a mayor. The mayor is usually elected separately from the council, so directly elected. And all of the councils and mayoralties, to my knowledge, are full-time, although in the rural areas they could have more part-time stuff. And again, I'm going to ask some people in the comments if they know any different. And we have a couple of these super city arrangements, especially in Auckland, and the rollout of these super cities, these amalgamations of local councils, especially in densely populated areas, have been slowed down just because of the disaster it's been in Auckland, there's also, unlike Australia, the National Party here doesn't run local candidates, and we don't have any other right-wing parties that run local candidates. So the only party that runs any local candidates is the Labour Party, and everyone else is either an independent or belongs to a specific local group.
Is this just for Auckland or nationwide?
So this is all nationwide.
Really? Why don't the National Party do that?
Because they're a national party.
Yeah,
so
but that's just a name. Like
they say that's their claim. They formed as a national party for the national elections, 100 and whatever, not quite 100 years ago, but nearly 100 years ago now, maybe just over. And they won't contest local elections. That's something they've decided and they've held to. So you have sometimes national party affiliated groups. So in Auckland, in some parts of Auckland anyway, we have a group called Communities and Residents, and they're loosely affiliated with the National Party, but there's no official campaigning or support given to them. There are some National Party members who sometimes run for these positions, but always as independents. And same thing with the Labour Party. The current mayor is actually an independent, Phil Goff, who reached international fame by banning Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern. He's an independent, but he's actually a member of the Labour Party. And I don't have them on my desk, but I got a leaflet from the Labour Party to vote for Labour Party candidates, and Phil Goff's name and photo is on the Labour Party brochure.
he used to be in the National Parliament, didn't he, Phil Goff, in the past?
As well, so yeah, he's been in cabinet as well. And he was a national level politician for a long time in the Labour Party, and his primary competitor, who's been selected for this election, is John Tamahiri, and he was also a member of the Labour Party, an MP for the Labour Party, and also a former member of cabinet, and he has been kicked out of the Labour Party because they don't want to have two Labour Party members running for the same position, I believe. But he has picked as his sort of running mate, or he said he will select his deputy mayor, is a councillor who is a member of the National Party. So he's kind of trying to bring in voters, who would normally vote for the National Party or who would be right-leaning, sort of centre-right voters. He's trying to grab, Labour voters as well to see if he can overthrow Phil Goff.
Now, there was a pub debate. It was last Tuesday night, again, something that happened while we were on air, where John Tamaru said something interesting. The question was, how are you going to make Auckland better for your grandchildren? Which, well, it's obviously they're both old dudes, so...
Yeah.
But let's just play what happened.
Secondly, I want them to grow up in a city which is a great city to live in, an exciting, vibrant city, an inclusive city, a diverse city. I love this city for its diversity, and we won't put up with the sort of nonsense that we get from racists coming into this country to tell us that multiculturalism doesn't work. In 6 weeks' time, I've got a grandson that will be born that's a quarter Maori, a quarter Filipino, and a quarter Irish and a quarter English, and I'll be really proud of that kid. That kid will represent the future of our city.
Of Auckland. Well, I say Sieg Heil to that.
Just like the Nazis.
But the point is...
That's a funny thing. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so when I saw that, I was sort of like, whoa, that's the candidate challenging Phil Goff for mayor. And I noticed that when it was reported the next day that apparently back when he was a Labour MP in 2008, that John Temery, I've just got to get the quote right here.
Yeah, I've got the quote. But
oh yeah, you go. Yeah.
Okay, I will read it then.
We got a phone call Thursday night.
Yeah, so people this is particularly bizarre, but then you add that up to back in 2008, while he was a Labour MP, he said that he was, and I quote, sick and tired of hearing about how many Jews got gassed. So you may be wondering at this point if this guy is basically a Nazi, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking that, but in New Zealand it goes a little bit deeper than that, because he is actually Maori.
And Phil Goff, yes, he mentioned about his grandson, but what is Phil Goff's actual ethnicity?
Yeah, I believe he also says at least identifies as Maori as well. So he will be, I don't know, half or quarter or something like that. And both of them obviously have European ancestry as well, and possibly something, other things.
But we looked at when we were talking about your Ilhan Omar politician in New Zealand. You
I was just going to bring this up, because we had last week, for those of you who watched last week's show will know that the top trending video in New Zealand was an interview with a mongrel mob member who ran an outfit called Heil's Kitchen, and he had swastika tattoos on his face. And so in New Zealand, the association of all of these weird Nazi slogans and quotes and so on are actually associated with what you might say as a gang made up of ethnic minorities, and they have kind of adopted all of this. Stuff, and so they're not white supremacists. They're actually brown supremacists, if anything, at that. But they're probably just thugs and mobsters, which is why they're the mob. So basically, you've got a gang running around who has appropriated all of these slogans and symbols, and it's likely that Mr. Tamahiri has been hanging out with his cousins a little bit too much. That was in fact hinted at by New Zealand First MP. I forgot, Shane Jones. That's right. So Shane Jones is the I believe he's sort of considered to be the next in line for the leadership of New Zealand First. And he mentioned that he thought that Tamahiri had been hanging out with the gangsters a little bit too much, and that's where all of those slogans come from. But I think it's probably a big turnoff for the more centre-right voters that he's trying to drag in, because the only ones who will directly associate the connection, or who won't be thrown off by that association, are the people who are connected with the mob.
So the interview that we were talking about, Guy Williams, who's his media personality, comedian. He's going out with going out. Yeah,
he's the boyfriend / partner of Golriz Gaharaman, who's a Labour Party. She's a Green Party MP, and she was in New York recently at the UN as well, hanging out with Ilhan Omar, the famous US senator. And yeah, basically we had this discussion last week about this being slightly awkward for him. And the funny thing is that episode was taken down by Jono and Ben, and I think TV3 is where it was hosted with. And they pulled that down, but not because of the mongrel mob swastika stuff that was going on. They pulled it down because there was another different sex scandal related incident in a later part of the episode. So I don't know the details of that, but there was some dodgy stuff that went on in that episode, and I can't really talk details on that because I don't know them, and the news articles have very little detail. So yeah, there's some really weird, bizarre stuff that goes on in New Zealand.
Yes, the fact that the closest things you have to Nazis are Maoris.
Yeah, that sounds bad, but that's basically it. And I was in a related thing, when Patrick Gower was digging up examples of white supremacists, he mentioned a gang in Christchurch which was called the Fourth Reich. That was a Maori gang as well, and it's not even negative. So people think that this stuff is weird. In some parts of New Zealand, what John Tamahiri said is going to get you out of trouble rather than into it, basically. So,
but it seems that because a lot of the nationalist, anti-immigrant politicians you have Maori ancestry, and basically this is how I sort of see it, because New Zealand was founded with a treaty with the British and the local Maori population, the Treaty of Waitangi, and it basically seems to me that these Maori descendants basically believe that the treaty says that, okay, Europeans can settle and live with us, but nobody else, and that any other groups that migrate to New Zealand, it's a violation of the treaty.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so some of these groups are, and I should be careful to say not all of them are like that, but some of them are definitely, and they often are more anti-immigrant in general, and they're actually opposed to Europeans coming to New Zealand as well. So they actually want to get rid of the treaty in that sense, or they believe that, you know, the treaty was not proper or in their interests. They actually would like to have their own country, and they'd like to, or at least have a much greater say in how New Zealand is run. And so, yeah, it's not that all of these groups are necessarily opposed to non-European immigration, but they're actually often just opposed to any immigration in general that's not Pacific, or in many cases, these Pacific island nations, they don't get along with each other so well either. So some of them would actually like to just exclude everybody and keep the country for themselves.
I noticed that the new Conservative Party, the new leader of that, people might think that he's Maori, but he's actually Pacific Islander. Yes,
that's right. So the deputy leader is definitely Pacific Islander. And I've just had a Maori friend in the comments say that they want to get rid of people who are 100% European, because obviously all of the people of Maori descent are actually a joint, have joint ancestry. So they just want to get rid of the pure, whereas like the recent colonizers like myself need to go.
Somebody said in our comments that you look like PewDiePie.
Thanks, I get that. I actually get that a lot.
Your beard is, I've noticed, it's starting to get quite out of control.
It's actually a lot shorter now than it was a couple of months ago, I think. So I'm trying to keep it under control. And Amy does a good, she tells me off if it's getting too large there. So, but PewDiePie definitely had a separate, different lengths of beard going on there. So depending on which parts of it, which videos of him you're watching will depend on whether I look like PewDiePie or not.
We could do a whole episode on the people coming out of Sweden.
Yeah. Well, that's right. We have talked about Greta Thunberg already, and yeah. But I'm not. I'm trying to think. I don't think I actually have any Swedish ancestry. I'll have to check one of the DNA tests that people in the family have done to make sure, but there is a little bit of that Scandinavian that everyone in Europe has, because the Vikings.
Yeah. There's just been some breaking news. I got multiple news alerts at once that the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom has just ruled that Boris Johnson's suspension of the UK Parliament was unlawful.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's some big news.
Yes, which basically means that the Queen's decision, because it was her decision, is invalid. Which is that's pretty insane for a court to rule.
That is, yeah, and if that's the top courts, then that's an interesting constitutional crisis they have going on there, I think. We may have to discuss that another time when we have more information. But you have reminded me, I did see a photo of Jacinda Ardern with Boris Johnson.
Ooh.
So that, like, I was saying, well, at least she's asking Boris Johnson for a trade deal, because that's something that New Zealand has been wanting since the 70s, when we got shafted by the UK, and we'd like to get our trade with the UK back, and Brexit is going to give us that. But obviously, no Brexit is bad for New Zealand.
Because it's been reported in our Australian media that when Brexit finally happens, that there'll be able to be basically a migration agreement between Australia and the UK that Australia currently has with New Zealand. There'll be a general Anglosphere freedom of movement, which is... Because a lot of Australians, no matter what ancestry, go over to the UK to work and travel, and so it's common there. And So, given that, well, they are the motherland. I mean, we're all part of the Commonwealth. That it seems reasonable to everyone, and that we have a lot more in common with the UK than they do with the rest of mainland Europe.
Definitely, and the UK has never got on so well with mainland Europe, and I'm originally from mainland Europe, and so I can say that for sure. And so they've had that separation there. And when it comes to immigration into New Zealand as well, the number one source of immigration into New Zealand is actually the UK, but not in terms of net immigration, because a lot of New Zealanders go to the UK. So our net immigration with the UK is fairly low, but that's because there's a lot of people moving backwards and forwards between New Zealand and the UK. And the discussions around the agreement you mentioned, sometimes called, I think, maybe it's called CANZUK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK. And that agreement, that sort of freedom of movement agreement, has been discussed in the past, but unless the UK leaves the European Union, it's not likely to get anywhere. And that agreement can be a polarizing issue as well. Some people are very much in favor of it, and others are not. Because if one country has more open borders than another one, it means that people can hop from people if people can get into the UK or Canada. If they have less immigration control than we do, then those people can jump across to Australia and New Zealand. So I've seen more Kiwis and Aussies raise concerns there, because usually we have we've been a little bit tighter on immigration because we've got ocean borders. And have had less overall immigration in recent years than the UK and Canada.
Well, our immigration agreement between Australia and New Zealand, it's not a right to travel to each other's country without a visa, and that's one of the gripes that Jacinda Ardern's had with Australia, that we're deporting New Zealand-born non-Australian citizen criminals. And well, of course, like Jacinda Ardern, she's just having a whinge on behalf of the people of New Zealand that these people are not connected with us. You're being, we think you're being pretty unreasonable about this. But the Morrison government and Peter Dutton have said, if they're not citizens, we're going to kick them out.
Yeah, and actually the sentiment in New Zealand, at least from the right wing, has been that that Australia's well within their rights to kick out people who are not citizens, even if they don't have a tight connection to New Zealand. The problem, though, that we have is that they're criminals and they get to come into New Zealand, and then our government just lets them walk on the streets. So we get these deported Australian criminals who come into New Zealand, and they get picked up 2 days later for firearms offences and drug incidents and so on. And some people in the comments are already saying that they are very, very happy that Australia deports criminals. But we'd be much happier if New Zealand were to do the same. I think that's the problem. If we can get New Zealand to deport our Australian criminals back to Australia, we would all be a whole lot happier here too.
Yeah, definitely. It's a two-way thing. I mean, if you don't want, you've got plenty of foreign-born criminals in New Zealand, and there is an incarceration problem in New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly. And deporting foreign-born criminals would solve that problem pretty quickly. And there are New Zealand. There are almost every other week issues in the paper about foreign-born criminals who are not citizens here, who have gone to prison in New Zealand, and then there's a whole debate about whether they could be sent back home, whether they could be deported, and the government tends to not deport them. And I believe the general sentiment in New Zealand actually is that people would like to see those people deported. If people do commit a serious offence in New Zealand, they should, and they don't have New Zealand citizenship, they should absolutely be deported.
Now, you haven't asked me much about Australian news this week, basically because the whole last week was the build-up to the Trump-Morrison state dinner. Sky News Australia, the most prominent conservative talk show host, Paul Murray, he had his Paul Murray live show from Washington, D.C. all week, and he was granted the only Australian interview with Donald Trump, and It only lasted about 5 minutes, and it was a real softball thing, like asking him, like, what do you want to say to your Australian fans, you know, for 2020, and then asked him about what his favourite food was in the White House.
Hamburgers?
No, he said steak.
Oh, steak, of course. Of course,
Yes.
I should have known that. Very good.
Well, he did. One of his companies was Trump Steaks, so he's obviously
That's right. Yeah.
he's obviously a big fan. But everyone was saying, because he basically came across as like a fanboy, Paul Murray. So everyone's like doing the cultural cringe, how embarrassing. And then there's a photo of him in the Oval Office, like doing the thumbs up with Trump, and Morrison's in the background. So it basically looks like that. It's like one of the times where sort of like the government's doing a favor to their favorite media personality.
Yeah, I can imagine that. In fact, the only photos that we've got from the UN are actually from a reporter who has, been very favourable to Jacinda Ardern and not very favourable to the opposition. So I do imagine that the foreign leaders of both of our countries, the leaders of both of our countries do travel to foreign countries with their favourite journalists.
And it's been, Scott Morrison's also been criticised because he's supposed to represent like what's termed the quiet Australians, which is another term for silent majority, or as it was known under John Howard, the Howard Battlers. But at the state dinner, there was a lot of billionaires and celebrities there. But probably the photo that sticks out the most is that there's a businessman. Anthony Pratt, he's the son of Richard Pratt, who owns the Visy cardboard company. And I just want to put this up on the screen because, yeah, it's a doozy to end the show with. There's Trump and Richard Pratt there. And basically, Anthony Pratt, he looks like how Trump would if he didn't do the hair. So basically, I think that, Trump probably, although Pratt, ask Trump, how do you do the hair? Because have a look at that. That's basically he's basically got very thin Ronald McDonald hair, to be polite.
Yes. He needs a toupee.
So we also had Australia's richest person and the world's richest woman, Gina Rinehart. She was also at the White House, and she met Trump, and she's slimmed down quite a bit because the left, even though you're supposed to respect women and not fat shame them, of course conservative women don't count, and so they always used to make all these disparaging comments about her appearance. But she went on a really epic diet, and she's the world's most powerful woman. Of course, she was fantastic to begin with, but now she even looks more better. And so I sort of thought maybe that Gina, she could give, because obviously Trump's weight's been in the news a bit, give Trump some billionaire fat blasters advice.
One of our opposition MPs here, who's the deputy leader of the National Party, she also was quite a large woman. She's actually had special surgery to reduce her size, and she looks quite healthy now, actually. When you're well paid, there are definitely ways to suddenly lose a lot of weight.
And obviously, I would suggest stick with the steaks. Steaks healthy, and so
that's right. But not for climate change, though. By the way, you've got to go vegan if you want to stop the whole climate change thing.
Yes, they're promoting these meat-based burgers now.
I don't ever see Trump going for that. So don't worry. I'm sure that steaks are safe, at least in America, for the next few years.
Well, given that New Zealand, obviously, beef and dairy is a big export there, a big part of the economy. It's probably where most of the climate change pollution is coming from. All those cows farting.
Yes, I mentioned that at the beginning, actually, which is the zero carbon bill. Basically, they're excluding farmers from it because that's our economy and that's all of our emissions as well. So we're going to have zero carbon emissions except for the majority of our carbon emissions, which are okay because it's the farmers, and that's
cow farts. That's what you've got to say. It's basically what
that's I believe the scientific term for it. Yes.
Yes.
And since we're going to be ending the show in a minute, I was going to say I was going to ask you, for comparison, a list of the achievements that Scott Morrison got. His deal. I believe he got a number of official concessions, maybe a trade deal from Trump, and we got absolutely nothing. So have you got a list of things?
I don't in front of me, but got very good trade concessions. So Australia is largely immune from, obviously, Trump's trade war. And Scott Morrison actually toured some of the Rust Belt with Trump. So it's very much, we're going to look after our manufacturing and jobs. So, yeah, there was a huge... It wasn't just a on-stage bromance, but, yeah,
they really... that's good.
Morrison got a lot out of it for Australia.
And I heard Trump call him the Titanium Man.
Man of Titanium.
Yeah. And was it Howard who was called the Steel Man or Man of Steel?
Yeah, by George W. Bush. So it's a one-up.
Yeah, that's right. Trump likes to one-up everything. And I suppose that's was largely related to Australia's steel exports, right?
Yes.
And New Zealand, I just while we've been talking about steel, I remember New Zealand has one large steel mill just up here in Auckland, and they've actually said if the zero carbon bill passes, the New Zealand steel will actually be moving to Australia. So unless they can get their own concession, so unless steel carbon emissions are also left out, because we obviously don't have that trade, the steel tariffs lifted on New Zealand steel, you may get another bonus from us, and that all of our entire steel industry will move over to Australia now. So,
well,
thank us for electing Jacinda.
At the end of the day, I'm Australia first. So if we win and you lose, then sorry.
That's the way it should be. But we don't want to lose all the time. We hope to get some wins, and we do have an election next year. And as the show goes on, hopefully we will be getting some more good news for New Zealand instead of just endless bad news.
Well, that concludes this week's episode of Trans Tasman Talk. We can probably get a crystal ball out and probably confidently predict that we might be talking about New Zealand sex again next week.
I would not be surprised if we have another a fourth episode on that subject.
Now, at the end of the show, I always send out the reminders. So, as I mentioned, this show is live on the Unshackled's YouTube channel and on the Right Minds YouTube channel. You can also look up the archive of episodes by going to our respective websites, because we have a show notes page there, and this show is also in podcast form now. It's on my Wilmsfront, part of that podcast feed. So I post all my Wilmsfront episodes and also the Trans Tasman Talk episodes, so that there's a podcast version of everything that we do. So I'll be back with Wilmsfront tomorrow night on Wednesday, which is another one of our show nights at 7 p.m. Melbourne time. I've got Alan Moran, regulation and climate change policy expert. He's going to be talking about not just Great Thunberg, but basically just as a whole, how much more insane this debate's got. So he'll be joining me in the studio. Make sure you subscribe to the Tim Wilms YouTube channel, which will be in the description, and also that you visit timwilms.com.
And you can find me at rightminds.nz. I should have a few articles coming out this week. I do have the Right Minds podcast as well, which is currently still on break. I can't guarantee that's coming back this week. But there are plans to do more podcast episodes as well. You can subscribe to the newsletter, and you can also join us on the Facebook group, Right Minds NZ Facebook group. And you can also go to the bfd.co.nz, and all of my work appears there as well, along with other right-wing and even more left-wing bloggers who love freedom of speech in New Zealand.
The Unshackled's just got a super chat here at the end from Thomas Van de Hof, $7.99 Australian. Thank you for your contrarian perspectives. Well, thank you for the compliment. That's because what we're aiming to do in Australia, and well, with our Trans Tasman partner, is create a alt media primetime lineup for, well, primarily Australia, but of course New Zealanders, they'll find it something they can get into as well. So I'm on air 5 nights a week, like 3 Wilmsfront episodes, and then obviously tonight, and then the Uncockables, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time every Thursday on the Uncockables YouTube channel, and then of course we've got XYZ Live every Monday evening at 9 o'clock Melbourne time on the Maddie Rose Live channel. We've also got Dieuwe Beltran's weekly live stream on her YouTube channel at 8:15 p.m. Melbourne time. She's got some Sunday nights debates coming up, which will be a Sunday night at 9 p.m. Melbourne time, which will be right after the Sunday night episodes of Wilmsfront. So basically we're setting it up so you won't have to listen to mainstream media, podcast, video, report ever again. You can just have an alt media playlist.
Yeah, that's awesome, and Tim's doing a lot of really great work getting that off. He puts a lot of time into that, and it's nice to be part of that and do just a little bit, one night a week, and provide a New Zealand perspective to the Australian audience, and also to get a nice bit of Australia-New Zealand rivalry going on for both of our audiences. I should mention as well that next week's show is going to be at a slightly different time slot, because we'll be going into daylight savings time here in New Zealand. So the show will be at 9:30 p.m. New Zealand time and at 7:30 p.m.
6:30.
6:30. So that's right. So half an hour earlier in Australia, half an hour later in New Zealand. And that's just for the 1 week while our time zones are desynchronized.
Yes, you start 1 week early. Well, New Zealand is always one day ahead of the world.
Right. Yeah, so we like to be ahead when it comes to everything, including switching our daylight savings over.
And of course, I can't do all these shows that I'm doing without the support of our viewers and followers. So not only can you send through a super chat, which Thomas did, but you can also sign up for an Unshackled premium membership at the unshackled.net/membership, or a direct donation via the unshackled.net/donate. We're also on patreon.com/theunshackled. We're also on paypal.me/theunshackled, which is interesting today because PayPal's deplatformed a lot of far-right people, but they're now under investigation for facilitating child pornography payments.
Wow.
So they'll service pedophiles, but not nationalists.
Yeah, well, that sounds an awful lot like the New Zealand Labour Party too.
And of course, you have donation options as well.
That's right. You can go to rightminds.nz/donate, and that's all the details are there.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your company on the Unshackled and Right Minds YouTube channels. We'll sign out for this week. So until then, have a nice week, and I'll catch you tomorrow night. And Dieuwe, I'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Trans Tasman Talk. To keep up with the latest real news and analysis from the Tasman nations, visit theunshackled.net and rightminds.nz.